To Jeannie's point, though, Maura, about whether or not we should be surprised by this, the president made no secret of his feelings on tariffs on the campaign trail. And by and large, it seemed that actually with the American electorate, this idea is popular.
And I think you're going to see a lot of his supporters and those who voted for him give him a bit of grace here and to see how it shakes out, because you're right, they did vote for him. And with that tough talk on saying how he was going to put tariffs to lower costs for Americans. But as economists have pointed out, the immediate impact is going to be higher costs on Americans. And so I think that's an important thing for us to watch as voters see how long they can endure before they feel the relief that President Trump has promised them. It'll be interesting to see how long they hold on in support of his plan, because he did, talk a big game about lowering costs for Americans when it comes to groceries, housing, and things like that. And this tariff announcement, and with our already, bit of frayed relationships now with Canada and Mexico, especially now with this, Canada's relationship will be a little more frayed on top of the end of the tariff delay that we have until March 1st.
He's talking about reciprocal tariffs as well here, Jeannie. It's time to be reciprocal, is the quote, as he tries to zero out essentially trade relations with many of our partners. Will we end up losing some of our partners through this?
I think that is absolutely a possibility, and that is one of the many things that people are very concerned about. If you are another country looking at what is going on in the United States, the threats, the way that he has fulfilled these threats, and just the uncertainty overall, you may feel that it is time to turn elsewhere. It is time to look for alliances elsewhere. And I think, what's so disturbing for so many people is this includes many of our allies. It's not lost on any of us that the tariffs a week or two ago, lost in time, were 25% on our closest allies in Mexico and Canada and just 10% on China. And so I do think that is a big threat. And people look at these kinds of actions and they are going to be judging him based on the economic impact. And I think that's where the markets are critically important. Donald Trump historically listens to the markets. If there is pushback on this, he will likely listen to that, and he may be willing to negotiate some of this down.
Well, and there's a question about negotiating with Australia specifically. We know he spoke with the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, earlier today, and Trump just said in the Oval Office he will give consideration to an exemption of these tariffs on Australia specifically. When we consider, though, the wider context with which this is happening, Maura, he obviously using executive authority here through Section 232 to enact these tariffs, things he can do via the office of the president, whereas he's running into legal challenges in many instances in the last few days, with judges blocking his attempts to rein in government, saying he's exceeding executive authority.
Yeah, you're going to see these issues come up time and time again where Trump is full steam ahead and is throwing a lot of things at the wall, seeing what will stick. But again, I think that his supporters and many on the Republican side, while I'm sure some in Congress are wishing that they were more part of the conversation, I think that by and large, Trump supporters are happy to see him taking action. For a lot of those voters, they watched as Joe Biden sat by in their view, right? They didn't feel like much was being done, and they felt the quality of their lives were in decline. And so they're looking for change, and that's what they voted for. And Donald Trump is certainly not keeping things stagnant, and certainly not at a status quo. Whether that's a great thing or not, proves to be seen. But for his voters, they are certainly on board with changing things and shaking things up in a way that may benefit their bottom dollar.
Headlines crossing the terminal. Trump tariffs on metals could go higher, as Kayleigh mentioned. We'll be looking at chips and cars with the idea of reciprocal tariffs. Jeannie, what's a Democrat to say this evening, knowing that this is playing well politically, domestically?
Yeah, it's playing well so far. We look at the CBS poll out this week, and CBS and New York Times had him above water at 53, historically low, but higher than Donald Trump was in his first term. But let's not forget, this time, For Joe Biden, he was over 60%. And boy, did that fall quickly after the Afghanistan withdrawal. So events like these are the very things that trigger a president to lose support. And that support will most likely be lost when all of these actions catch up to the president and people start to feel the effect. And so Maura mentioned earlier, the costs at the grocery store, the costs in people's lives, the minute they start to feel those, you can bet that his support will drop. So that's what Donald Trump is going to have to pay particular attention to. And for Democrats, there's not a lot they can do at this point because they don't have the power. They can stand up and they can warn, but there's not a lot they can do. It is up to Republicans in the Congress, in the courts, and elsewhere to stand up and try to be a wall, just try to be sort of a bulwark against Donald Trump if there's anything illegal or unconstitutional. But politically, it's going to be when people start to feel things that his numbers could drop. But so far, he's in pretty good position, and he knows that.
Well, and Maura, do you see any sign of that Republican congressional check taking shape?
You know, Congress is interesting in that they like to have their separation of powers, their checks and balances. But with the House, I'd say that they are really, step in line behind President Trump and trying not to step out of line in a lot of ways. So they're not going to be that bulwark or be that wall, as Jeannie mentioned, because they support the president and they support the fact that their constituents voted for him as well and want to at least see it through. And we will, again, we'll see how it pans out if it really does lower costs for the American people. But it's a bit too soon to tell. And I think just his brash nature of things tends to catch people off guard and cause us to have concerns that are valid. But it's too soon for Republicans to, I think, at this point, speak up and say this is the wrong choice. They're not going to do that.
Of national intelligence. And back with us for final thoughts is this evening's political panel, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Maura Gillespie. Jeannie, we just have about 2 minutes left here, so if we could quickly get answers from each of you. Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., for that matter, look likely to be confirmed this week. Should any of us be surprised?
No, I don't think. Once they got through committee, it is almost unthinkable that they wouldn't get confirmed. So not surprised, but it is very telling about where the Senate on the Republican side is at this point. It is truly Donald Trump's party, and that's being reflected in pushing through these two very controversial nominees.
Case in point, Punchbowl says Mitch McConnell voted in favor of Tulsi Gabbard. Maura, is the transformation complete?
I'd say yes. I think that the biggest tell for me was those conversations that senators who had been on the fence and who had been very concerned, and rightfully so, that Tulsi Gabbard refused to call Edward Snowden a traitor or Bashar al-Assad a war criminal. But they were reporting, it was reported that they had said that their conversations with J.D. Vance and others in the Trump world and Trump leadership is what swayed their opinion, not Tulsi Gabbard herself or anything that she had said or encouraged them. So their confidence was in the Trump team, not necessarily in their trust in Tulsi Gabbard.
Interesting. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, Maura Gillespie, thank you both for a great panel, a great conversation.